What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of A Thinking Man's Podcast, the first ever in-person podcast with my good friend Tommy Styles. We're out here at, how would you say it, the West Coast Mecca?
The West Coast Mecca of the desert, Musclefactory Gym, Tempe, Arizona. Shout out to Lance, the owner, for letting us record in the posing room where we are at right now. This is my home gym. This is where I've trained since the tail end of 2020. Proud to be here. I've been here since it just keeps expanding and getting better. So Joe's had a first-hand walkthrough of it. He can vouch for it.
Man, no exaggeration. This is probably the best bodybuilding gym that I've ever been in. So if Lance happens to listen to this, I don't know if he watches the show, but massive, massive respect for the gym that he built, for allowing us to do our thing in here, making a special accommodation for us. Very cool. I don't know what, as a serious competitor or as a serious bodybuilder, I don't know what else you could possibly ask for. I mean, it's unbelievable. Yeah. 3 full rooms of everything from original Cybex and Nautilus stuff to the newest Nautilus, Prime, Arsenal, all of it. Just unbelievable. We were talking about it before. You could run push-pull legs with 6 different variations and never come back and repeat the same workout. So it's a pleasure. As always, I have to say this episode's brought to you by Kodiak Bodybuilding Apparel. I'm all decked out in my stuff. Train hard, die strong. Thanks to Chris Cirillo for supporting the show. So here, Arizona, 2 years in the making with Tommy Styles.
First ever time we've met in the flesh. Only took 100 plus podcasts together, so very cool.
Yeah.
We got some questions. Got them from the Facebook group. Joe put up a Q&A. We got them from there, so we're going to try to run through as many of these as we can. Might not get a ton of long-winded answers, but we'll see how we do. So I didn't even look through these. Have you noticed using insulin on high days, it seems to ramp metabolism more than without it?
Definitely. Yeah, I worked with Justin Harris for the past year, and he has a pretty particular insulin approach. I made a little bit of an adjustment to it myself. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that for people that are hiring coaches, but just knowing what I know and doing this as long as we have, I made a little bit of an adjustment to it, but his style is a high, medium, and low carb day, even through the off season. And the high carb days are out of control. I think I was up to like 1,200 grams of carbs as like a program day. And that was my easiest eating day of the week. My medium training days were probably 700 at one point, no insulin, and it was brutal. Those were the days that I would wake up and feel anxious about it. So, long story short, absolutely. I've done both Lantus and Humalog, and very similar effect, at least in that regard, regarding appetite. You absolutely see an increase. Now, they're two totally different things, 2 different action times, but it definitely helps.
Yeah, I have done insulin in all different phases. Pretty responsive to it, so I like where it shines the most for me is on a high day and a prep when I'm really depleted. I'll use Lantus and Humalog combination, and the carbs will be easily 800 to 1,000 on that day. Protein will be a bit lower, and it's just obliterating fullness. It's actually hard to get the food down on that day, but to give you an idea of how it would look is get the body super flat to the point where it's going to be detrimental to the final product, have that high day. It's like fuel in a gas tank. You're on low fuel, you're fueling back up with glycogen, and then you're just going to run through that reserve again. And then you might repeat the process every so often based off the timeline of the show or how you're responding. Some people get in positions where they need back-to-back high days. There's no rules in bodybuilding. So I think Chris Aceto's he's been pretty influential with that process. Andrew Vu, I know, is very on that. Justin is as well. So there's a lot of coaches who've figured out how to utilize carbs in high, medium, low days to get the end result.
To add to that too, I think like if we're talking about those high days, because you made a good point about it being in prep, that's one of those things. I've done it every possible way as a bodybuilder myself and as a coach. And I think in some cases, that high day where it's an entire day of like out of control amount of carbs is probably best. One, if you have insulin in the mix, but two, if you're a bigger bodybuilder. I think cheat meals come into play when you get someone maybe that's not new, but not exactly a veteran in the competitive game, right? Where it's more of almost like a mental thing, like they need a break from the process. They need an hour to go eat with their girlfriend. But also, that one meal might be enough to fill someone back up. You're walking around at a flat 250 pounds. One meal of burger and fries is not going to do it. So it might take 1,200 grams of carbs to last you that week running on that fuel.
Yeah, that's all situational. So moving forward, do you prefer doing leg extensions before quad compound exercises, or is depending from person to person?
Why don't you go first?
At this stage of where I'm at 32, I prefer them before. I think there was a lot of years where I liked the compound movement before, but now it's all about making sure everything's moving well and feeling good, and I'm connecting. Less about total weight I'm moving. Still the goal is progressive overload, but I like adductors, curls, and leg extensions before a quad compound now.
Yeah, I'm the same way. For years, I would just, walk into the gym and throw my bag into the squat rack and spend 45 minutes there, right?
Yeah.
That's not happening anymore. And I think this comes to play too. Even I've recently dealt with some on and off kind of knee issues, and I've tried both recently because I'm like, man, what is going to work best so I can get through this? And without a doubt, the days that I do all of that other stuff first, my knees feel better when I get to the other stuff. And also, like you said, I'm not trying to set weight PRs and, big totals. So it's like, all right, if I can get the same stimulus out of fucking 3 plates on a hack squat because I've killed myself on extensions first, well, then great. Like everything will thank me tomorrow instead of having to put 8 on it and, beating the shit out of my hips and knees. So, yeah, I think it just depends probably how far in you are. And also, man, like we can tell you what we like, maybe what we've seen as a theme with clients. And if you just go in and it doesn't feel right, try something else.
And it doesn't have to be either or forever. You could do a period of time where you pre-exhaust with leg extensions, and then you could flip-flop and change it up based on, if you're hitting a plateau, usually that's when you make changes like that to create a new way to progress.
Yeah.
Sticking on the theme of legs, do you think leg extensions, leg curls, and adductors are needed for beginners to early intermediates? Needed is a tricky word.
Needed, that's why I kind of paused. Needed, no, I honestly don't think most things are needed.
Right. I can tell you when I was a beginner and an intermediate, the adductor machine was foreign to me.
Me too, I thought it was for chicks.
Didn't look at it.
Yeah, I would look at it like that's for girls exclusively. Extensions, I can't say that I ever had a period really unless I was hurt in my knees that I didn't have extensions in.
Right.
I do think it plays a part. I think if you want to build some big ass legs, why would you leave anything out? Now, maybe because if you're talking beginner, and you're just trying to get the most from the least, maybe there's an argument to try to get as far as you can on as few movements. But man, if we're talking like bodybuilding and maximum regional hypertrophy, I just don't see why you would leave that stuff out.
Yeah, I think it's so hard without context. So early beginner, intermediate, I don't know what that means, but if I'm thinking of someone just getting into lifting, maybe you're younger, I probably would pick one of those and keep them in. Maybe, so one leg curl, one leg extension, and one compound squatting pattern. And that you could run that for a really long time and just progress and get strong. I do think you don't need a ton of exercises in the beginning. Your body, you don't have a ton, you haven't built up the capacity to require a ton of volume. So you probably only do need one exercise per body part in the beginning for a true beginner. Intermediate, then you could start to add a little bit more. But I think there's a lot of progress to be made, with full body splits, upper lower splits. It's just not sexy on paper. A lot of people, and I was one of these people, jumped into a bro split way too early. and was doing 36 sets for back because I saw it in a magazine, and it was not conducive to growing a back at the age I was.
Yeah, I saw Jay Cutler do it, so you're like, fuck it, that's the way.
9 exercises, 4 sets per, 8 to 12.
I will say that adductors one is way less needed,
Yeah.
especially early on. I think if you are doing whatever your compounds are, whether it's a squat movement, leg press movement, if you are burying them enough to grow your quads effectively, your adductors are going to grow. Now, at some point, 4 years in, you may look up and you want to get on a bodybuilding stage and your quads have grown well, and then there's a little bit of a gap when you kind of stand them out. Then you can bring that movement in, but I think they probably should just grow as long as you're burying your squats early on.
What is your typical training method for someone with lagging arms? We get this one a lot.
We do get like,
We don't even have great arms.
I was gonna say, why don't you go?
There's no typical training method. Honestly, it's just the first thing I do with someone with lagging arms is I focus on form and execution, because that I find is usually the biggest thing that needs to be addressed. They're very small body parts, especially biceps. Biceps do not need a ton of weight. I see way too many younger people and just people with ego trying to curl 40s, 45s, 50s, and even higher. And it's like, man, I can't remember the last time I curled a 40, and my arms are an inch and a half bigger than they were when I was doing stuff like that. Hammer curls, same thing. I mean, yeah, I could grab the 70s and do it, but it's just going to be all tendonitis, and the ROI isn't there. So slow down the negatives, really focus on a full range of motion with both biceps and triceps. There are certain movements that are better for a stretch when it comes to the triceps and better for a contraction. Figure out what those are for you and just check the ego and spend time in a full range of motion. But I think the knee-jerk reaction is to throw a bunch more volume at the arms if they're lagging, and that can have application if you have the right storm with food, PEDs, and the rest of your training split. And we've talked about throwing more volume at our arms and delts, but I don't recommend that for someone newer or in the early stages. I think you just need to hone in on execution and realize that you're going to get the most bang from your buck based off of focusing on one rep of one set and maximizing everything to efficiency.
Throwing the kitchen sink at it in terms of volume is probably like 5th on the list in terms of your checklist of things you should try before doing. I'm completely with Tommy because, it seems easy. There's really not many options when it comes to arms, right? Like you're doing some type of extension of the elbow for triceps, some type of curl for your biceps. And I see most of them just terribly done. Like people don't put as much thought into it because it's easy, it moves, you feel it. But I think like elbow alignment and all this stuff, it sounds dorky, but I think it makes a bigger deal on some of these smaller muscle groups. I think like accuracy is more important when the muscle is smaller, right? Like think about if you were trying to hit a tiny little target, like you better be on point with your accuracy. Versus if you're trying to hit a barn door, like you can kind of launch it from wherever. So I think like, I'm a big believer in single arm stuff, mostly for curls too, because if you're gonna supinate and you have any meat on you at all in your lats and your shoulders, like it's not gonna line up if you do a bicep curl or something fixed, right, where you try to do both at the same time. It's just not gonna work. Your elbows are gonna hurt, your forearms are gonna hurt, and your arms are probably gonna stink. So this is just the worst case scenario. So I like your comment. I like just looking at how things are done, and then be thoughtful about the movements that you choose too. Man, like one warm-up set, like especially if you're in the off season and growing, eating plenty, you should do one warm-up set of whatever your first chosen movement is, like of curls, and immediate nasty pump, vascularity everywhere. Like it should be right away. Then when you have that down, like that has to be number one. When you have that down, you can talk frequency. We could go into the weeds on frequency, split design, total volume. But if you just do more shitty work, your arms are not going to get better.
Yeah. No, I would argue that things like abs, arms, calves, people go through the motions on, but if you really tune into every rep of every set, you're going to find that you're going to get a lot better stimulus. And if you do that for 6 months and take pictures, I bet you there's a difference. Or take measurements too.
Yeah. Yeah, arms is a big one, I think, for measurements. It's worth doing. Why don't you check the Facebook group too, because we got them all over. We got them on IG, we got them on the Facebook group.
I'll do one more here and then go over.
Right.
Do you feel logging everything is necessary? I feel it's always hindered me to chase numbers.
Do I think it's necessary? I would probably answer that question with another question and say, if you aren't logging it, how do you plan on assuring that there's progress happening? Because if you're just weighing it, or if you're going by feel, you're going to feel different every time you're in there. And there's just different nuances. Like I think about tracking in terms of weight, sets, reps, total volume, little notes like, you did 3 partials to finish the set. Like if you're just winging it in there, it's going to be very different to consistently add progressive stimulus. I think progressive stimulus is probably the best way to think about it. Because hearing this question, I feel like it's more of a perspective thing for this guy than anything. Mm-hmm. Like if tracking your stuff has forced you into just adding weight and training with shitty form, that is on you and your outlook on what progressive overload is. So for the most part, yeah, I mean, if you're one of these people that just hates it, I would ask how much progress means to you versus like just the emotional fulfillment of training. And I think for advanced guys, I think a good compromise might be tracking your main lifts and kind of training your smaller stuff intuitively, but also we've had people ask about arms. Like if your arms stink and you really need them to improve and you're not tracking things, you're not logging which movements and your performance on them, you're going to get what you've always got. So is it, what was the question? Is it necessary? I think it's really fucking important, if I had to put it simply.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a logbook guy. I've had time away from it, but it's the bulk of my progress has been made with the logbook. Now I know exactly where you're at individually because I know who you are, and I'm not going to throw you under the bus on the show, but you remind me a lot of myself when I was younger. I didn't understand all the functions of the tool of the logbook. A lot of people get stuck in the numbers of it. The logbook is a tool to figure out how to use to find progression. So think of it like a meter. You're just going to find I can add more weight. That's my progression on this exercise. Oh, I only got 9 reps and the rep range was 6 to 10. I'm going to do the same weight and I'm going to get 10 reps with proper form. You have to be honest with yourself too. A lot of people use mechanical advantage, or they might cut their depth short 3 to 4 inches, but they get the number in the logbook, so they keep going up weight. And they're just building up their ego, they're building up tendinitis and inflammation. There's not actual tissue being built, and there's not tissue being maintained in prep if you're using a logbook in that term. So it's just really about, the big thing with the logbook I've realized currently, because I'm using one on every single thing, even abs, is checking the ego and finding ways to create progression. My numbers that I'm using load-wise are a lot less than I'm capable of. I could come in here every day and do what I've done on Instagram 2 years ago, but it's not going to build me the tissue that I want for what my goal is. So he made a good point. You have to decide what's your goal. To look really strong on Instagram and move weight and to train more like Branch Warren, or is it to make progress? And then be honest with yourself. Are you taking pictures of yourself on a routine frequency? Are you changing? Scale's going to change if you were someone who used to be heavy pretty easily or have the capacity to gain weight really quick. But if you're actually making progress and the goal is making progress, then the logbook, you find a new way to work with it. Changing exercise order, changing any variable. I mean, if I have 2 meals before the training instead of versus 1, that changes what I could do. So I'm obsessed with keeping everything as Groundhog's Day as possible right now, because I feel that that's the best for me and where I'm trying to go. I also point out that just because I can do a certain weight doesn't mean it's building tissue for me. And Nick Walker's a good example of this. I just saw a video he posted where he's doing 225 on the incline bench. And he states in the video that he's got videos of him doing 405 for reps, but he didn't have a chest when he was doing that. Now he's doing 225 full range of motion and really, really connecting with his chest mentally on every inch of the rep, up and down. And he's stated that his chest is better. So that is progression, despite that the logbook verse when it was 405 is he's using less than. It's not a negative because his goal is progress and filling in his weak body parts. So ultimately, you're getting anxiety because you're fixated on the numbers and not actually fixated on progress within your physique. And that might be just something you need to revisit altogether. Jumping over to Facebook, have you guys ever run into clients who have to really walk the line closer than others regarding calories in the off season being enough to recover from training but not get too fat?
100%.
Yeah, easy.
And I think these people need a coach. Like, I'm not even gonna try to tiptoe around it. If you're talking about being on stage at some point in your year, you need a coach all year. It is impossible for you to look at yourself and be objective about whether or not you are toting that line of eating enough to grow and recover versus eating too much and getting fat. You probably have too harsh of an image of yourself, and so you're gonna undereat. And then now you're leaving progress on the table. And you're exposing yourself to the risk of PEDs, the risk and wear and tear of training, spending all this money, and you're not getting the return that you should. So point blank, like, those people are going to need a coach. And also, like, if you're really about this, like, you have a more strict off season ahead of you. There's just no way around it. Because yes, you can be Lee Priest and get super, super fat and then bring it in peeled. But most of you that are watching this are not Lee Priest. So the fatter you start prep, I truly believe the fatter you are going to end up on stage. Now, let me further explain that because it sounds simple. I think on the flip side, the leaner that you start and the more within striking distance of a prep that you start, you can get to another level at the end in terms of conditioning because you started a level up. Like, I think there's only a certain amount of runway. 16, 20, 22 weeks is only going to get you so far, especially then if we're talking about being worn out versus looking fresh and muscular on stage. Can you get 60 pounds off in a prep? Sure. Is it your best look on stage? Probably not. So if you leave yourself 30 to 40 pounds to lose and you give yourself 20 weeks to do it, a good coach should bring you in on the money, peeled at a week out, remove cardio, bring food up, and you look insane on show day. So yeah, I mean, to answer the question simply, yes, there are these people that just need to be tighter. You might be doing something like carb rotations during the week, even in your off season. You might only be doing a cheat meal every other week because it's like, okay, what matters more to you? Eating productive food or having a break? Like, how about this are you? And I have seen people that are like this burn out because it's difficult. It is difficult to have less runway in the off season. But at the end of the day, it just comes down to how big of a priority is this.
Yeah, I mean, he covered a lot of it. It's depending on the case. I mean, you might have off days from training that are no carbs. 100%. That might be your life normally. So the question was, do we have clients that we have to walk a tighter line? The answer is yeah, we do. I mean, I've talked about on the show how much food I have to push, and I'm lean year round. That's not the case for a lot of people. And some people, it's really not the case. If they were to total up macros and calories, it's very, very low. But at the end of the day, that's why you don't compare, and that's why you don't worry about things. You worry about, am I making progress? You got to do, if progress is important to you, which we've highlighted on this podcast since the inception, that we are progress driven and that will remove feelings from the ability to make progress, then yeah, you have to walk a tighter line. You're the type of person who could get peeled for a show, and if you tried to do your own thing post show, you're fat within 2 to 3 weeks, like fat. And that's just because of how your body is. Even if you're someone who's lost a lot of weight, it takes a lot of run-throughs to like make you not someone who's going to gain all that body fat back. Just because it's off visually and from a like a body scale standpoint doesn't mean you don't have the same chemistry inside of you that will be that receptive to getting fat again. And I've seen this with a lot of lifestyle people too, and a lot of times they get emotional and frustrated about it because they end up comparing themselves to someone who can stay leaner or and it's like you got to run. That's the time where comparison is the thief of joy. You just have to run your own race and understand that there may have been some decisions you made when you were overweight and heavy and fatter that you now have to pay for by having stricter adherence than other people.
Yeah, I mean, if you were fat for a long time, like, if you think you're going to, like, reset your set point, so to speak, it's going to take you spending that same or longer duration lean and eating less. Like, you can't be fat for 5 years, do a prep, and then think, like, okay, now I'm reset, and this off season I'm going to eat a ton of food. That's probably not the case. It's probably going to take, several off seasons of staying pretty tight and then getting peeled several times for you to kind of reset it. That was a good question.
I'll paraphrase this one because it's long, but the question is, how come adding in new fads like step counts is something every newer coach is doing in their client plans? He goes on to mention that he understands NEAT, but what happened to keeping it as simple as possible? Examples like Chris Aceto plans are basically like what an elementary school kid could write up. Just curious on both your thoughts. I remain neutral with the step count thing. This is actually a good question from a good place. I just tried to paraphrase it.
Yeah, you kick it off. Go ahead.
On the Chris Aceto part, yeah, I mean, obviously I'm close with Dusty. Dusty worked with Chris, so I have an insider view of what it was like to work with Chris, and I've asked Dusty numerous questions about it, and I know a lot of other people that have too. You have to take into account the caliber of athlete Chris Aceto works with that you're probably seeing. He's not having to worry about if his athletes train hard. Every single person that is an athlete of Chris Aceto's trains like an absolute savage. Yeah. And I think things like step counts matter less and less and less with the people that are insane within their training. And not to sound bitter and like an old head, but there's a lot of people that we get as clients that, or prospective clients, I'm not throwing any of my current people under the bus, but they don't train hard enough. And it's our job to tell them that. And it's to really hammer it home that you do not train hard enough. Training hard for one session does not cut it. It has to be like that every single time you step in the gym for months into years. When that's a thing, yeah, to be fair, I don't worry about step count. I think it's very, very easy for me to hit my step count, and I go to war with clients back and forth of when I hear excuses about it, because you could do something as simple as walking back and forth in this room, and I could knock out a 2,000. I was on the phone with Dusty the other day, and I had my watch on, and it was 2,100 steps on a 25-minute phone call, just back and forth outside. Find ways just to move. At the end of the day, the step count is just to encourage movement, and I think the reason it became popularized is, it is trending, but also there was a thought behind it of like, man, a lot of coaches feel like broken records because we keep telling clients to train harder and harder and harder, and they're just not getting it. So we have to get them to lose fat somehow. And a lot of people can subscribe to the idea of just walking outdoors, especially if they're prepping in a time where that's okay, not winter. So I think that's why you've seen a rise in it. In theory, it makes sense. Now, I think there are some cases, and it's person to person, where 12 to 15,000 steps is a lot harder for them than just putting them on a piece of cardio equipment for X amount of minutes, especially if they have it at home. If it's someone with kids, multiple jobs, other responsibilities, we take all that into account. But it's not, again, with the logbook, I mentioned it, it's a tool. Step count is just a tool. It's just meant to drive further fat loss and drive NEAT up if you're in a prep. And in the off season, I think it's really beneficial just to push nutrients around after meals, and Stan Efforting kind of popularized that with like 10-minute walks post meal.
Yeah, I think it can seem a little neurotic, and I think where the line is, at least in my experience, of does this have a good application versus this excessive and neurotic, is when you're using step count to, or when you're using step count as the main driver of output and fat loss in a contest prep, like you said, where you have people doing 20,000 steps, because that's just time consuming. You're going to turn into a maniac pacing your house.
Yeah.
And people in your life are going to look at you like you're insane. People in the gym are going to look at you like you're insane because you pace in between your sets. You know, you're going to have to go get a step mini treadmill under your desk at work, like all this stuff. I think in that case it's too much, and I would rather just stick someone on the stairs for 40 minutes, put them on intervals and let them work their ass off and sweat their ass off for 40 minutes and get in and get out. You know, in terms of people not training hard and like needing that to assure a minimum output, I think too that comes in like with people that are less muscular, because you're less muscular, you're not training as hard, so something's got to give. And I can only pull your food down so low to where you're just getting small. So I think steps then at that point, just standardizing them is a good low impact output. And again, like, not to get on a rant, but if you had a coach, you had a successful off season, like it shouldn't take 22,000 steps a day, low food, machine cardio, and training your ass off to get in shape. If that's the case, somebody fucked up, whether it was you or your coach.
And to kind of piggyback off that question, because you mentioned Chris Aceto, his eye and guidance, his guys kill it most of the time. Yeah, they do, but that is where you have to take in genetics. You have to take in training intensity and years in the game.
Yeah.
He's not working with beginners and intermediates.
Yeah.
He's not working with people watching this show for the most part. So
we know everybody he's working with, which gives you an idea.
And he does keep it simple. I mean, because so simple to the point you almost feel like you're getting neglected. But he does have an eye on things. So I will say, like, don't base who you're going to work with based off of what you've heard they do.
Right.
You know, the high days and the muffins, or don't work with Justin because you get high days with him. Don't work with anybody based off what you think their niche is. You know, Chad gets guys big, so you're going to work with him. Like, you got to be honest with yourself. And, you know, are you ready to work with someone like that from a financial standpoint? Can you afford everything they're going to tell you to do? Do you live a life that you can, you know, make bodybuilding the number one priority? I think Joe and I take into account the psychology and the lifestyles of our clients when we build plans, when we build drug protocols, when we build diets. You know, a lot of those guys, and this isn't a knock on them because they've earned the guru title, they don't have to worry about that shit. If you're coming to them, they're not there to hold your hand on any part of the process. They expect you to know how to adapt. If all your food spoils, you know how to figure out how to macro match in your day. You're not going to message them and say, "Hey, coach," they don't deal with shit like that. They are dealing with the best of the best who are very, very skilled at managing their own ship. They just choose to have someone guide it, because most people are going to drive themselves into the ground. That's why they have that eye, to make sure they don't do that.
Yeah, with those guys, like the Tommy's plan, it's not a knock. Those coaches have earned that right, but you're going to pay a hefty price with those guys, and then also you're just going to get like the pretty standard stallion protocol, and they're using it as a test to see, can this guy hack it or not. Like, there's not adjustments to what they do, you know, for 185-pound lifts his shirt up to check his abs in between sets. Like, here's the drugs, here's the food, talk to you in a week. And if you didn't nail it, well, then fuck off. You wasted your money.
Yeah, it's a running joke with the responses that you get from some coaches due to how short they are. It might just be like, "High day, picks Thursday."
Yeah,
No, there's no loons.
Flat picks Friday.
There's no WhatsApp. You know, some coaches don't even allow you to text them until you're within 4 weeks. So, you know, a lot of what you perceive to be how it goes is just because you might be newer. And, you know, I thought that way too, but it's when you start to talk to people at the national level that have worked with these guys, and then the pro level, and then you hear the stories, you start to understand that, like anything, there's levels. Recently finished a 2-week stint where I backed off calories, reset appetite, digestion, bumped calories back up to where they were before, have been super hungry. Should I increase food here based on ability to eat more or keep food the same? My weight is still trending up, about a pound a week. I'm about 4 weeks into a cruise, if that makes any difference.
Good addition at the end. I do think it makes a massive difference. The whole time I'm listening to it, I'm ready to tell the guy to add more food. And then 4 week into a cruise, like, you're going to be pretty close to baseline of whatever you've decided to run as your cruise.
Right.
Those first couple weeks are probably still a little elevated, but 4 weeks in, I think, this can depend. Are you one of these guys that can get fat pretty easy? Because if so, I'd probably leave it as is. You're gaining a pound a week. You're hungry, which is a great thing. I think in off season, it's a great thing to try to extend the hunger. Like, play it out and keep you hungry as long as you can. Now, if things stall for a bit, yes, you want to add, but man, being hungry is awesome if you can be in the off season.
Yeah.
I think with all those parameters, if he had been like on a cycle, I probably would have felt pretty comfortable with telling him to add some food. But I think for now, what his idea should be, if you're going to cruise for 4, 6, 8, 10 weeks, something like that, man, I think the best case scenario is that you've gained a half a pound or a pound a week and you're still fucking hungry when it's time to get back on cycle. If you can do that and keep yourself hungry until it's time to go back on, I think that's probably the best case scenario based on the info that he gave us.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I think the key word there is that you're super hungry. I think that's a great spot to be in. And I highlight that with my clients every week to make sure they know, hey, I'm not adding food, not because I'm lazy, but because I want to keep this level of hunger that we have.
Yeah.
The worst place you can be in a time where you need to be growing is not hungry. It's way worse than being starving in prep, I promise you. So, there was a reason you did the reset. It was based off of appetite and digestion. So your reset worked.
Right.
That should be what you focus on and just keep building from there. Density equals time at a certain musculature, which means time at a certain body weight. I also think time spent eating a certain amount of calories is also pertinent. So don't just increase calories for the sake of increased calories. Same thing with training. Don't just increase weight for the sake of increasing the load you're using. You know what I mean? Just if I can keep someone at, say, 45 to 5,000 calories a day for a really extended period of time, that the changes that are happening are going to stick. That's acclimation. That's called I like to call it the marination phase, where you're just kind of, just because a coach is telling you leave everything the same, they're not lazy. A lot of times they can see further into the process than you can, and you're doing your job and checking in. That's the synergy of the relationship. But for everything you gave us, I would keep everything the same. Do you guys prescribe to taking your fasted blood glucose levels every morning and monthly A1C levels? If so, what are your thoughts on why this is done?
Man, I'm at the point where I don't tell anybody to even bother with fasted blood glucose unless it's a known issue, or we change something to try to improve that. We recently got blood work back and things were a problem. There's individual circumstances for sure, but as a general rule, or let me say, if we're using insulin, especially a rapid insulin, I think it's great to have a monitor on you and be ready to go. But man, it's just too variable for me. And I think it's one of these things, like there was a question in there about something about being neurotic.
Yeah.
Man, I don't know that I know of a single metric in bodybuilding that's been popularized over the last couple of years that makes people more neurotic than fasted blood glucose. I've had people tell me that they've sat and spent an hour sitting and testing their blood glucose over and over and over again just to see a number that would allow them to start their day. Like, it's out of control. And it's just too short term of a snapshot in time. Like, it's just right this second. Are you stressed? Did you have a cheat meal the night before? Did you have shitty sleep? Are you not hydrated enough? There's too many things that can throw it off. And especially now with A1C monitors being available for at-home use and they're affordable, I would do that. I think if you want to do that once a month, I think that's probably more than enough to give you an idea of how things are trending. And I think that's really the important one.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with all that. I do have my clients track blood glucose twice a week. I just ask for 2 readings, um, maybe one after a training day and then one coming off a rest day, just to see 2 different values, because I do think that plays a role. But I also, I try to explain the process of how to set yourself up to get the best numbers. For instance, if you had a poor night of sleep, don't take your blood glucose. Guaranteed it'll be elevated. Don't take blood glucose dehydrated. I always tell them, me personally, I know I need like 60 ounces of water before I take my blood glucose, because I wake up super dry. If I take my blood glucose fresh out of bed just after peeing, 100%, it's north of 100, maybe even higher. Give me 60 ounces of water, it's in the 80s. And you're dehydrated. That affects blood glucose. So I give them a set of parameters to check it. And again, I'm not focused on what one number says. I'm focused on trends. That's how same with blood pressure. I think it's, someone gets a high blood pressure in the office and they message me like, what should we do about this? I'm like, they probably used the wrong size cuff. I guarantee it, because they do it every time with me unless I make them use the bariatric cuff. And, the normal size blood pressure cuffs in most doctors' offices are only built for like 16-inch arms. If you don't even have to be lifting that long to have a 16 or 17-inch arm, so you got to factor that in. But with blood glucose, I think the daily measurements is just a way to dig yourself a hole as far as your brain. If you're one of those people that can't obsess, I can do it, and it doesn't bother me what number I see, because at the end of the day, my A1C is always in control, and that's what I put most of my stock in, is A1C. So it's just client to client. I mean, I do like to see 2 readings a week, but rarely am I going to make changes unless the A1C was also, am I looking at a guy who's into a 5.4, 5.5 A1C, then yeah, we're pulling back. I don't care what the blood glucose, even if it's low, I'm pulling back. Right. But I think a fasted insulin reading is also people don't get on blood work enough too, and that can tell you a lot too. That it's not just blood glucose that dictates things; it's the 3. So, get a full picture before you make a diagnosis. Do you think beginners should hire coaches, or would it take away from the learning experience? This is an interesting question.
Man, I think, it's easy as a coach to say, yeah, hire a coach. But
info down below, by the way.
I think the learning process is going to be a better one if you choose a good coach. The learning process without one is a lot of trial and error, and in that error, there's a lot of wasted time. Now, it's not wasted because you gain experience and information back from it, but my best stretches of progress have always been under a coach. So I guess it depends on how young that person is, what their life situation is in terms of being a beginner. Like, are you 15 years old, you make no money, your mom cooks your food, and there's no way for you to get a coach? No, you're going to be fine. Like, if it's something that's a priority, get a summer job, save up, and eventually get a coach. If you're 21 and you're 2 years into bodybuilding and you've done the typical, like, hire a coach 16 weeks out, do the off season yourself, get fat, come back to the stage and look exactly the same as you did last year, it's time to hire a coach, unless you're just checking a box every year. So, there's value, I think, in stretches of both, but, like, I don't know, for me, like, I look back and I wonder where I might be right now if I didn't take long stretches without a coach. So, just from an older guy in this to somebody that's just getting started, I always approach things with a lot more confidence when I had someone that knew what they were doing telling me how to go about things.
Yeah, I think, so the word beginner, again, I don't know the context of what that means to you and how I perceive it. So I think if you're someone who started training for whatever reason, sports, you wanted to get bigger because you were small, now kids are finding out about bodybuilding much younger because of social media and the reach that bodybuilding has, whereas when we got into it, it was much more niche because there really wasn't, you either wanted a bodybuilder or you were going to do board short division with the men's physique, and then the female divisions weren't nearly as vast as they are now, so it didn't have the reach it does. So a lot of people our age and even older found out they loved training first. That led them to bodybuilding, which then led them to, for a long time, it was like I had no clue what I was doing with nutrition. I knew about protein because that's what was talked about, and I was like, okay, protein, protein, protein. Gotta get all my protein. But I didn't know how to like structure meals. I knew about macros, but I didn't know about how to put them together for myself. So if you're someone in the beginner stage who knows you love training, like you have no problem going to the gym 4 to 6 times a week, and then you've played with trying to figure out your own nutrition by taking in various information from people's social medias, podcasts, ebooks. Hell, there's curriculums you can buy now that teach you how to do all this stuff. So
Yeah.
if you've done that and you're still interested, then I think that's the time to hire a coach. But before you've figured out if you even like to train on your own, I don't think there's a merit to hiring a coach, because a coach can't make you love training. Me giving you a training plan isn't going to make you want to go through it. I knew that training was like, come hell or high, I'm quitting jobs to go to the gym. Like that's how important training was to me in my youth, and it's never stopped. Like I still get just as excited to go to the gym, and I've been doing it 20 years. So I think establishing that passion to just love training, regardless of doing it for bodybuilding purposes, is necessary first and foremost. And then some of your own due diligence on picking up some nutritional stuff. If you come to a coach like, hey, you can understand the information they're going to give you. They're going to take all the guesswork out, but you should have an idea of what a food scale is and how to use it, because you've been trying to do it on your own. You've been trying to create some semblance of routine and consistency, and maybe even started tracking things on your own. Those people are going to do a lot better with a coach than someone who just shows up on the doorstep like, don't have a food scale, don't have a body weight scale, don't track my training, don't really pay attention to my training. Like you're swinging, you're going to a gunfight with a knife in that situation. So it's all context dependent. I hope that breaks it down a little bit for people who are on the fence about hiring. It's an investment. A coach is an investment. I didn't start making real progress until I started working with a coach. I trained for 11 years before because coaching wasn't what it is now. I guarantee I would be 10 times ahead of where I'm at if I had the ability to start with a coach sooner, or if I took the initiative to start with a coach sooner. But it just, where I was at in my life and where I was at geographically, it just wasn't a thing that like I knew how to find someone. And the first person I did know how to find, and I was in a position to pay him, I did so. And progress, and a couple stretches I've been on my own in the last 10 years, and I haven't made the progress I've made with a coach. So for me, it's a no-brainer. I need to be with a coach. I have too many clients and too many other things to do to worry about my own stuff. I want to be a client for myself, and I want to coach others and let them be clients for me.
Yeah, I asked you before I started like my year of prep, like I was kind of toying with the idea like, man, I've done this a lot, helped a lot of people, have taken in a lot of knowledge. I'm like, what do you think about the idea of me doing this by myself? And you're like, you're an idiot. So simply put, that got my mind right.
And that wasn't because I don't think he has the ability to do it. I just know the amount of time he would have to invest into that process. Yeah. It's not worth the return, because he's got a business to grow. He's got clients to get ready for the stage. He can't be worrying about his own stuff. Like, should I do more cardio? Should I do less cardio? Am I flat? Am I full? Do I need to hide it? Like, let someone else take care of that and just focus on your own life. It'll lead to a lot less stress, a lot better sleep, and a lot better outcome, most likely. So I think the very few people that are self-coaching in today's climate, because I think the argument is everybody in the 90s did it. Well, they might have, but also I don't think life stress was near where it is today in the 90s. I mean, social media, there's no pressure on social media. There's a lot of the things in the world weren't where they're at, or weren't where they're, then they weren't where they're at today. So I think with all those factors combined, I just think it's in your best interest to have a coach if you're the higher up you go. But for a beginner, if you qualify, and part of what I gave is like being a beginner, figure out where that fits in for you. I knew I loved to train, and I think that has to be present to figure out any sort of potential in bodybuilding. If you don't love to train, I can tell you right now, you're not going to go far in bodybuilding, because good luck. I think that about covered it, man.
I was going to say, that's good.
We hammered through.
Yeah.
That's the most we've ever answered, probably.
Yeah. Yeah, so first ever episode in person, first time meeting, first time ripping through all these questions, as many as we did. So, man, hopefully that's some good value for you guys. Thanks to everybody that did write in questions. Thanks to everybody that follows the show. Like the video, leave us a comment, let us know what you think. Send it to a friend. That always helps a ton. A lot of messages I get are from people that just found it from a friend, sharing it on their story or sending them a clip, something like that. So that definitely helps a ton. So thanks for everybody for supporting the channel, for supporting Tommy and I. Until next time, we are out.